Remember those days of being a kid? I grew up in the 90s, back when video games had mascots all over the place, and some of those mascots have aged pretty well, some starting in the late 80s, like Mario, or Link, or Donkey Kong, mostly the Nintendo characters. But some of the mascots that appeared in the 90s have not aged so well here in the 2000s, millennium, whatever you want to call it. One of those mascots is one of my personal favorites, the one I hold dear in my heart, and that's Crash Bandicoot. Now, Crash Bandicoot started off as a pretty successful series, with game after game, year after year being released, each one better and better, and a bigger and bigger hit. But lately, Crash has fallen from his mascot idolhood, if that's even a term, and I think it's time for Crash to get back to where he used to be, one of the coolest game heroes ever. Now, how did this fall come about? Well, in this video, I'm going to chronicle the start and finish of the Crash Bandicoot series, but I'm mostly going to cover the main games in the series, the platformers, if you will, and the ones created by Naughty Dog. So sit back, pop some popcorn, and hopefully you enjoy the show. Okay, let's start with Crash Bandicoot 1. Crash Bandicoot was released on August 31st on 1996 on the Sony PlayStation. It was one of the first 3D platformers and one of the best 3D platformers that I actually never played. I never got around to playing the first Crash Bandicoot when it first came out because at the time I didn't even know what a PlayStation was. I was a Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis kid, and I wasn't exactly updated on all the newest video game things. The first time I saw Crash Bandicoot was over at a friend's house. He had a PlayStation. He's like, hey dude, you should play this PlayStation. And being a curious little kid, I'm like, what's a PlayStation? And he turned it on, he popped in a demo disc he had, and there was a video of Crash Bandicoot. And I remember watching it and being like, holy crap, I'm really missing out. So like the following week I begged my mom, you gotta get me a PlayStation. So finally, she got me a PlayStation, and I'm proud to say that my first game I ever owned for my PlayStation was Crash Bandicoot 2. But we're talking about Crash Bandicoot 1 right here. So, from what I remember, the main story is Dr. Cortex, the big dude with the big N on his head, is trying to create an army for world domination. And he believes that his leader is going to be this Bandicoot that he found, this docile little Bandicoot that was minding his own business, and that happened to be Crash. And he used what he called his Evolvo Ray to try and turn Crash into this army leader. The Ray rejected Crash, and Crash managed to escape. And Cortex still had Crash's, I guess you could call girlfriend at the time, Tawna. He still held her in captive while Crash got away. So the main premise of the game was basically for Crash to get back to Cortex's castle, save Tawna, and in the meanwhile, try and clean up all the pollution that was being created by Cortex's Evolvo Ray. Now, the game had a lot of variety when it came to the levels. You were running from boulders, evading crabs, TNT boxes, and you even had Aku Aku, who was a spirit mask who would aid you whenever you needed help. And if you collected 3 of the masks, you turned into like a Super Bandicoot for a certain amount of time and you were invincible. Unless, of course, you fell into a pit. The game generally received pretty high remarks and praise, although a lot of people said it is fun, it just doesn't really add anything new to platformers. But this was the start of something really, really special for this series. Yee-haw! Alright, next, Crash Bandicoot 2 Cortex Strikes Back. Now this is where it's at. This is probably my favorite Crash Bandicoot game out of all the games released on the PlayStation. And like I said, this was my first PlayStation game and my first real 3D experience. And it was released on October 31st of 1997, so a little over a year after the first Crash Bandicoot. This game was pretty overwhelming when I first started playing because I had never experienced a game like this. You had a warp room with all these different levels, and Crash was running from polar bears, and he was riding these really cute, adorable little polar bears and trying to avoid death traps and man-eating plants. And he got to ride really cool jetpacks in this really crazy level with electrical wires flying everywhere and TNT crates and these really bad engineer astronaut guys who were pretty sucky, but they always posed a problem somehow. And this game was so charming. Crash, like, literally, he was like the coolest mascot hero at the time. And he became my favorite, you know, move over Mario. This is more fun than Mario. And I know some people probably won't agree with that statement, but that's how I felt at the same time, and I still kind of feel that way. Crash, the old games anyway, are still kind of my favorite platformers. Now, the main plot of this game, if I remember correctly, took place a little bit after, about a year or so after the first Crash game, and Dr. Cortex has discovered these crystals, and he figures these crystals can power this new Cortex vortex ray that he's creating. And if he can power up these crystals into his ray, he can control and enslave humankind as we all know it to basically become his whole super army. And it starts with Crash laying on the beach with his sister Coco. This is the first time that you really are introduced and see Coco. And she's on her laptop on some program and her battery dies. So she tells Crash, you know, make yourself useful and go get me a new battery. And it starts out just like the original Crash Bandicoot, looks like the original Crash, plays like the original Crash. And about, I don't know, halfway through the first level, Crash is abducted by Cortex. And he's basically fooling Crash into thinking that he's a good guy now. And that the henchman in the first game, whose name I'm blanking on right now, is really the bad guy, and Cortex was forced to be evil because he was being enslaved by the first guy, whose name I'm forgetting. I apologize. But in reality, Cortex is tricking Crash, and his sister Coco is onto Cortex, and she's like, Crash, be careful. I don't think you can trust Cortex this time, or at all. And what's the guy's name? Brio. There you go. Nitrous Brio. He is able to contact Crash, and he's actually being truthful. He's telling Crash, Cortex is up to no good. I'm trying to stop him. If you can help me by collecting all these gems, we can stop Cortex. But if you don't help me, I'll be forced to destroy you, is basically what he tells Crash. So throughout the game, you're collecting all these different crystals, and finally towards the end, you face off with Cortex in this really epic jetpack race, which I remember being very frustrating. And it ends with Cortex, of course, his plans being foiled, and Crash and Brio end up activating Brio's laser to destroy Cortex's vortex laser. And I remember just having so much fun with this game. It was like, it's still one of my favorite platformers. The graphics were amazing for its time. The music was so catchy. And the different warp rooms and being able to clear out a warp room, save your game, and then move up to the next level and fight a boss one after another it's really cool and exciting. And like I said, I'd never really experienced like anything like that before.